So hey everyone. So this is TCL 62's weekly sync. Today we're going to be going over the state of our issues from last week. Grace is going to go over accessibility with a learning module and why it's important. And then I'll dole out week's issues. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay. And then Grace, do you want to do demos?
Yeah, so we're gonna kick off with demos. Does anyone want to go first?
If we don't have volunteers, I will volunteer to go first.
I think we have a volunteer. On to go
Okay,
first.
cool. Let me just get everything all set up here. Want to get to the issue. How's everybody doing tonight? This is recorded for posterity. I can't wait for this to go viral, and then everyone will be like, "Hey, look at this guy getting his thoughts together and stalling while he gets screen share open on Zoom. Isn't that funny? Ha ha ha." Here we go. Okay, so I should have my screen share up. Can everybody see this? It's the
Yep, looks good.
Okay, cool. So our task for the week, the summary says users should be able to add an empty item to their, or should, I'm sorry, users should not be able to add an empty item to their list or add the same item twice. If they try to do this, we need to show them an error message that explains the problem. This way will prevent some clutter in their lists. So this is our code. We have a couple different approaches depending on what the functionality is, and I'm gladly be happy to talk about either of them. As far as what it looks like in here, if I just, I'm gonna jump over to the application and start over again with a brand new list. So I'm gonna create a new list, and we're just gonna say, let's say we need eggs, for instance. And great, the item has been added to our list. Say we also need kale. This time I put a space between kale and the closing thing, and item has been added to our list. If we jump over here, see Rosie Tick Inane. If I go to the console and see there it is, Rosie Tick Inane. The items have been added as anticipated. However, if we try to add them again, kale, exactly as I typed it, however, without the space at the end, we've already added the item. It's not accepting it. If I try to type kale in all caps, already added the item, will not accept it. If I try to type KALE, a bunch of other stuff, a million spaces, and then a lowercase e, once again, you've already added the item, it will not accept it. Again, also, if we have an empty form here, I'm just going to submit that. You've submitted an empty field is the error message we get. It only flashes for 1 second. That's just kind of a bit of a placeholder functionality for having some changes within the rendering of the page, so that users know that there's interactivity going on between the application and them. If I just put in a ton of spaces and try to submit, again, empty field, it will not accept. So the way that we went about this was within the add item function. We already had the states in place here. So this is just, kind of simple state manipulation. I understand that when we were doling out tasks last week, there was a recommendation to try to do this without regular expression. We opted to do both options, and kind of as a group, we can decide which would be best. So, first and foremost, this all happens within the submit function. So the first thing that we tackled was the submission of an empty field. So after the prevent default, we have a conditional that says if not empty item, if the item set item field associated with that state is empty, or if the item, once it's been kind of cleaned up and had special characters removed, such as spaces, which would render it a fully empty field, is equal to just no space, then they get the status you've submitted an empty field. The next check was we wrote a check for duplicates function, which is associated with what I was just discussing regarding the regular expression versus a non-regex version. If you put in a duplicate item, you get the status you've already added this item, and then the item name state is once again cleared. So the way that we went about that, the check for, I think that the empty field part is kind of self-explanatory. If not item, so empty space, or if once the item has been like trimmed of special characters and potential white space, it's empty, it's not going to accept it. The check for duplicates was a little bit more tricky because for that, what we had to do was ensure that regardless of spacing or capitalization or special characters such as exclamation points, ampersands, asterisks, and such, those would not register within the adding of it. The version of that we're using is we do have a regular expression for special characters that includes, everything from A to Z and all numeric values. And then this brief little function here called cleanup item, which just accepts any input as the parameter, and then it just returns that input lowercase with the built-in replace method, which then just checks for if any of the special characters that are excluded by the regular expression, and then replaces them with the blank space there. No a zero string value, basically. We have another version of this up top here that is commented out, where instead of just having a regular expression to compare things to, we have the same function cleanup items accepting an input. We declare up here the alphabet, basically, and then another constant for the accepted characters, which is the alphabet in uppercase and all values from 0 to 9. These are accepted, and then we have an empty string. So then we just, using a simple for loop, we just run through the user input, and then compare each element of the user input. And if there's a match between an element and the accepted characters, then those all get added to the empty string that we declared up there on line 16, and then just return that accepted string. We then, in both versions, I think, we do have a constant for trimmed items, which just takes the function cleaned up items in the non-regex version, or just clean up item in the regex version, and just reduces it down to what the app wants to see. So then with that, I'll do one more quick little show off thing here. I typed in eggs before, I typed in kale as well. We're gonna do Greek but spell it all crazy. Greek yogurt with all that kind of stuff. But maybe, because we want to have users be able to add things based on brand name, maybe this is some new hip Greek yogurt startup that has decided to use all those kinds of fun characters in there. If you submit that, it will accept it. If we go to our list, it's accepted exactly as typed. If we check our the console in the Firebase, let that refresh, we now see that Greek yogurt, exactly as typed, is accepted and listed in the database that way. However, if we try to add it again, just spelled perfectly normally, it's already been added to the list. It's recognizing, it's removing the version that is checking against, has removed all the spaces, all the capitalization, all the special characters, and knows that Greek yogurt, regardless of spelling, is in this list. And yeah, I believe that covers it. I would open the floor to questions or input from Magda.
Good, thank you.
Awesome job, you guys. Jenny and Arsha, do you guys want to go next?
Sure. Jenny, I have the app running, so I'm happy to share the demo on the website.
Yeah,
and then
go
if
for
you
it.
want to talk through the code, maybe we could split it up like that. So let me just share.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
All right, so we have a shopping list here, and our issue for this week was to make sure we can update the next purchase date. So if you look at this list in Firestore, I have made sure that there's some kind of variety going on here, but everything so far, its next purchase date was simply set by when you know, in one of our original issues, when you add the item to the list, you can choose how soon you want it. So that sets the initial next purchase date from anywhere from 1 week to a month out, right? I manually changed some of these for the sake of this demo, but ideally, every time you update next purchase date after that initial add item, it will use this algorithm that will show you in the code that updates the next purchase date. So for this item, Lucky Charms, you can see that right now the date next purchased is set to the 24th, but if I buy this item and then head back here, you can see that that updates to a future date. And the algorithm works in a way, so the algorithm for updating the logic was already included. Jenny and I did not create that, but we implemented it so that it would appropriately apply to this field. But yeah, you can see that depending on the date created, date last purchased, and total purchases, that changes how frequently or what date it'll estimate for next purchase. So here at oat milk, when I purchase it, sending it out to the 27th. So, and then if it hasn't been purchased too many times, so if it's never been purchased before, or if it's only been purchased one time before, when you check that, it also returns kind of a simpler estimate of when it's next going to be purchased, just using the difference between what date it was originally set here and when it was created. It'll subtract that to get the number of days and just push that onto the current date. So yeah, there's some different ways you can see here that it's updating date next purchase based on the existing data in the fields. And yeah, that's basically what our issue took care of.
Thanks, Archa. Do you have, yeah, okay, cool. I will share my screen to share the code.
So I can keep sharing if that's easier. I have it open. Do you prefer that?
That's okay. No, all good, all
Okay.
good. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, so as Archa mentioned, we use the built-in calculate estimate function to create the next purchase date. And so to do that, we created, so we're in the list item component where yeah, we can just walk through from the top and what we added. So essentially, like on line 24, we created some helper functions to calculate the some of the variables needed for the calculate estimate function. So the first one is get days since last transaction. And essentially if so we calculate this essentially if there is a date last purchase, then we will convert that to seconds, otherwise use the date created in seconds, and then find the days since last transaction by finding the difference between today and either of those two options. And then another helper function that we created is get days between last and next purchase. And we did kind of a similar calculation, except for using the last and next date purchased from the database. And then we tied it all together here in line 55. Yeah, to calculate the next purchase date. And then in the event handler on line 62, we passed, so we called all those functions and then passed that variable to the update item function, which is defined in Firebase, or our Firebase file. And you can see here on line 85. So we just passed this to update that property within the database. One of the acceptance criteria was to also create a function that finds the difference between two dates, and we weren't exactly, I guess we assumed that it was going to be used. We weren't exactly sure how it was supposed to be used, just because it didn't, we thought it made more sense to do all of the logic in like outside of this API, outside of the database API, just from kind of looking at the other API functions. And so we actually did all the you saw we did all the logic in the list item component, but yeah, so we actually did it there. But and I haven't had time to review the mentors comments on our code, which I appreciate you all doing. So we'll need to figure out how to integrate this that acceptance criteria into our calculations.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the comments, I can't remember which mentor left this, but we thought it made more sense to do it in list item, but then someone brought up a good point that like separating what's happening in the back end and what's happening in the front end can help with, you know, some of the code efficiency and structure. So yeah, we will take a look to see how we can move that logic essentially.
Any comments, or maybe, you know, we can walk through those comments now.
I would just say that, you know, from reviewing your code, I think that all of the logic and everything is there. It's just like a little bit of refactoring and then it'll be good to go.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it does everything it's supposed to. I think the issue is just like you have this function that they're saying you have to use, which was calculate estimate, and then it takes in you know, the three parameters that it all expects to be like numbers. It expects them to be formatted a certain way. So you're just trying to figure out how to format them the correct way for that function, and then like how to use what it returns to you. So you did all that. It's great. And then yeah, just making sure that because like right now, I almost wrote this in my comment, but I didn't. Like if you wanted to know uh like how you were getting that estimate in Firebase.js, like if you want to know how you're updating that value in Firebase, you'd have to look in 3 different files right now to figure that out. Whereas like the other way, you just kind of like feed the data in, and then the utils function would format it, and then it would go to like the built-in like Firebase function that's from, you know, Google or whatever. So which is like a little bit easier to find what you're looking for.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely work on that this week.
All right, awesome. Great job, guys. One thing that we have kind of noticed, it's been kind of a recurring pattern. We just want to make sure as mentors that you guys are communicating well between each team. And whenever like if you have like a review that's needed from the other team, let's just make sure to follow up with the other team as necessary before Sunday, because we want to try to get not ahead of schedule, but we want to just make sure that we're on top of things like schedule wise. and not having to close out those PRs after the Sunday syncs. But with that said, let's go on to the accessibility learning module. Let me just share my screen. Figuring out my life here. Okay, can you guys see this? Okay, cool. So we are going to be talking about accessibility, the what, why, and the how. You guys may have heard this term ally. So it comes from accessibility being 11 letters. And it's a cool just hashtag best way to kind of like group your thoughts with, or like find a community that specifies like they want to talk about ally related topics. And so accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites on the web by people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. There are a lot of, and I'm sorry because my camera is kind of in the way, so I'm trying to read while moving around that thing. But there is a working group dedicated to web accessibility and publishes related standards in the US. And then there's also section 508. You'll hear the term 508 a lot when talking about accessibility. Just kind of connect those two concepts together, like 508 and the W3C when talking about accessibility. There are assistive technologies that are used by people with disabilities. They include screen readers, screen magnifiers, speech to text, and other dictation software, assistive keyboards, braille displays, and many other tools. Some of these are listed here, and I'll make sure to drop the link to this slideshow in the group chat later on so we can check out the links async. So there's a couple for Windows, a couple for Mac, and at least one for Android. The why of accessibility, number one, it's very important. It's the right thing to do. I've personally experienced, not through myself, but through a family member, the lack of really just the lack of being able to use a website as that person got older. I've had to kind of figure out, I've never used accessibility tools myself, but I definitely saw the need for it. So we just want to make sure that the internet is available and accessible to everyone, regardless of their situation or their actual accessibility needs, because everyone deserves to be able to use the web with dignity. I really like that. There is also a legal obligation depending on what kind of product you're making or what company you're working with. There is that legal obligation to make sure that that website is accessible. I know that with like marketing agencies, I worked with a marketing agency that was fined because their product was not accessible to other users. So that is definitely a concern. One of the things that I always asked when I was a junior dev was, is this accessible? Is this something that we could improve on? And usually, depending on the company that you're working with, they probably have a legal team in making sure that it is accessible. So it may not be your concern necessarily, but it is a concern just overall to make sure your product has that capability to be usable with accessible tools. So there is a persona spectrum. This shows the permanent, temporary, and situational scenarios. As you can see, if you're a new parent, you may not be able to touch things, or if you have an arm injury or you only have one arm. And then I think seeing and hearing, those are the two biggest, more common accessibility concerns that we're aware of. Of course, people being blind or having cataracts, or even as a distracted driver, that is a situation that you might not have the availability to view something. Of course, if you're driving, I really hope you're not browsing the web. And then hearing, being deaf or having an ear infection or being a bartender, that's a situation where you're not really capable of using your full senses. Or if you're nonverbal or have laryngitis or have a heavy accent. These are all different situations or personas that we kind of view these issues as. It is a quick tool to help foster empathy and to show how a solution scales to a broader audience. The how, follow some simple best practices. There are some concerns about, you may have heard about the term ARIA. It's kind of, the jury's kind of out. Like, I know, like for my company, we do use ARIA attributes. Some companies prefer not to. So I would definitely recommend just kind of digging into that if accessibility is something that you'd like to focus on. So just kind of be part of that conversation. Always use valid HTML, semantic HTML. Definitely always use all attributes on your image tags. Like I said, if necessary, use ARIA attributes, because that some screen readers and some accessibility tools do use ARIA attributes, but some of them, it can kind of be a hindrance. Definitely just, like I said, dig into that conversation if that's something that interests you. Make sure all content is reachable via keyboard. There are some concerns about making sure that people have the right tools. That's really important. And ensuring interactive elements have reasonable target sizes. We want to make sure that people with different screens or different devices have that really accessible to them. And ensuring content and tab ordering makes sense. This can be really easy to kind of jumble if you're working with a project and you have multiple people touching different parts of the code. So just making sure you have like a wiki or a Confluence page, just making sure that like your tab ordering is written down, just so there's clarity for everyone involved on the project. Using sufficient color contrast. I believe Chrome DevTools has an option to test color contrast, so that's really important. And don't use only color to signify state, because if you have someone that has color blindness or decreased ability to see, that would be a hindrance to them. So what is ARIA? It stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It is a tech spec written by the W3C, the same people who write the HTML spec. Again, ARIA can introduce problems for accessibility tool users. So I would just strongly recommend just digging into the pros and cons of why you should use ARIA and why you should not. And just ultimately, as long as your code is semantic and it makes sense I'm trying to look at the chat. Thank you, Jeremiah. That's a really good point. So just make sure that your code makes sense and it's legible. Really, if you can disable your styles, disable your JavaScript, and your page looks like it's in an organized order, that when you plug it into a screen reader or an accessibility tool, it's in a good format, that it makes sense, that's really important. I'm just trying to go back to Jeremiah's comment. Yeah, that link is really good. I really like using the Mozilla Developer Network as a tool. So highly recommend that. How do we use ARIA? So I personally, because my company, I don't think we use ARIA tools necessarily. So I'm not super familiar with these, but there are different ARIA roles that some screen readers and some accessibility tools do use. Again, just make sure that you're checking with whatever company you work with, if you use it or don't. No, I'm going to. Sorry, clicking my mouse makes me So just make sure you're looking at those ARIA roles and just making sure you're digging into the documentation. As always, documentation is going to help you out, regardless of what portion of the code you're working on. So it's really important when you are using ARIA to just look through the documentation. I believe W3C has a spec for that specifically, to where it's just easy to read and you can just kind of test it out. W3 Schools, I'm pretty sure also has a like a playground where you can test ARIA roles. I should find that link and send it to you guys. And we will have some more resources later on. ARIA has some overlap with HTML. I think that's why there's a concern of whether or not you should use it. But the roles, sorry. The roles are definitely useful to some accessibility readers. But also just making sure that you can access the page without ARIA. That's really important. And like it says, we should always use HTML to build our page before we try to add additional aspects of the page. My mouse is not cooperating. I'm sorry, guys. And then of course adding CSS and JavaScript to give those properties more functionality. Just always making sure that your color guidelines are correct and making sure that they're well contrasted. When you use JavaScript in terms of accessibility, just make sure you're not overriding any other properties that for example the accessibility tool might use. So like if you accidentally like have a function that disables a button click, is that necessary? Just make sure you're keeping that in mind. Or if you're disabling like the back and forward buttons on your keyboard, is that something that's necessary? Is that something that you can explain on your page in case someone is using an accessibility tool and they're like, well, what's going on? I need to be able to use that button. So just always try to have ample reasoning and just try to make sure that you're communicating to your user why a feature is not working, or try to avoid disabling that feature to begin with. These are some tools that test for accessibility issues. And again, I will link these slides to the chat. Let's see. This is a good one. I haven't used it personally, but I've seen screenshots of it. But there is a good point that's raised. It only finds about 30% of issues. I know Chrome DevTools is starting to have more accessibility like tools. So dig into that. There's a lot of tabs in Chrome DevTools, so you can kind of figure out like what is out there. And then there are also audits by accessibility testers and accessibility companies. I know that there's a lot of accessibility proponents on the Collab Lab. So if you want to just reach out in the Learning Together chat, there are a lot of people that have concerns. I believe EJ is one of them. Andrew is definitely one of them. If you are interested in having an accessibility audit on your webpage and you want like in-person communication, that's always a really good resource. And then obviously you want to have feedback from real users with disabilities. Just try to make sure like a real person is testing your page, and just try to understand it's all about broaching the subject with compassion and trying to see like thinking about it from another person's perspective. Like if I had diminished vision, what is something that I might experience? Or if there's a lot of audio in my website and I have a user that cannot hear anything, is that website going to be accessible to them at all? And things like that. And these are some more links. So I'll drop this in the chat. And I think that's it for the learning module. Do you guys have any questions?
I actually have a couple questions. This is super interesting. And I'm glad that we're doing this presentation. I on the tool slide, there were a couple things listed. You know, Axe being one of them that said, you know, only finds like 30% of it. I looked up the Accessibility Insights website, and that looks like a really valuable tool. But it's like, you know, built into the browser and checks for issues. Is there, to your knowledge, something equivalent, like you know, a linter specifically for accessibility issues, like something that runs in the background of the code that's similar to a JavaScript linter, checks for like, you know, misuse variables or like, you know, typos within the code? Is there an accessibility linter that might go through HTML and CSS stuff and say like you have, you know, conflicting classes here that might not work well with accessibility, you know, consider fixing that type of thing? Just something to flag errors in the code itself instead of within the development browser.
Let's see, I just looked one up. There is a link here, I'll drop it in chat. ESLint does, I think ESLint has been, no, I think it's TSLint that's been deprecated for ESLint. So that is I haven't used these specifically for accessibility. With my company, we work with UX designers, so they kind of take care of that component of is it going to be accessible? They have like the color guidelines and things like that, size guidelines. So it really depends on the size of the company that you end up working with, like what is going to be a concern for you as a developer. But ESLint, there are plugins for it. Let's see, there's also the Axe linter for VS Code, WebHint. I'm not super familiar with these, but it looks like Axe is going to be the really major one. Axe linter is not tied to ESLint, but it does work with VS Code and does have a lot of different tools. ESLint has different plugins for like React Native, JSX, Vue, Angular, so different frameworks and different libraries. So that's a good resource. I'm going to keep digging into this and see if I can find some more resources to share with you guys. Because accessibility, I have one colleague that I went to boot camp with, and she's very much into accessibility. And that has been kind of like she's been job hunting, and that has been like the thing that she's looking for, is to be an accessibility champion. So I think it's a very important role to have. And that can kind of give you a niche when you're job hunting to try to focus on, like if you want to be like a front-end developer, back-end developer, accessibility focused. There's also like developer relations where you write a lot of technical code and you speak about it and educate developers that are using your code. So there's a lot of different roles that you guys can think about while you're job searching, and something that you can find interesting in that you can focus on. So I don't want you guys to think that like when you become a front-end developer or a back-end developer or a full-stack developer, that's the only thing you can focus on. There's a lot of different things that you can do in this industry that can emphasize what your interests are. So accessibility is something that's very important. And yeah, I'll make sure to drop this link in the Slack channel too. But yeah, any other questions? All right, cool.
I would just add, I don't know if anyone's ever pointed, I don't know if there is like a go-to, like this thing checks all of your accessibility concerns or issues, just because that would probably be like the go-to thing if there was one. And also just because there are so many different disabilities and like ways that people navigate the web, checking for all of those is like really diverse. And I think it's kind of like testing, and like Lyle said it before, like testing for like UI things is hard. So um I don't know if there's like a thing to do other than like, I know that these are ways that my website can not be accessible. I'm going to make sure that I don't have any of those going on. And there's some easy things that you can learn to like show that you are at least have like that you have that in mind when you're working on projects and things. So the first one is what I said earlier, like learning some of the semantic HTML stuff. If you have like a button or something that does something, you can set text to be visually hidden, so that way only people with screen readers can see it. And so that way, like your visual people don't read what a button does because they can tell from the symbol, but the people who are navigating your website with a screen reader will hear what it does, so that way they can interact with it that way. And then the last one that like I usually try to keep in mind is like not adjusting the font size on your body or your HTML element. Don't set it to like a specific pixel value or anything because um a lot of people like a lot of people that I know, usually it's like older people whose eyesight's like getting a little bit worse. They zoom in on their phones, so their text size is like bigger than what you set when you're making the site. And if you set like a specific pixel value on your site, then it can mess with like what their zoom does. So those are all kind of like a starting point. Yeah. Okay. And then are we ready to do next week's issues?
So,
Okay. And then I'm going to share my screen. And sorry, the dog is kind of like whining a lot, but okay. So for next week's issues, we have trying to move this. Okay, so we have Hans and Jenny and Archa and Magda, and so we're on week 6, 17th through 23rd. And the two that we are working on are 11 and 12. So 11 is users might make a mistake when entering an item or may decide they won't be buying a certain item again in the future. Allowing them to delete list items will help them keep their lists tidy, or maybe they put in like a specific type of like yogurt brand and they don't want the hip new yogurt brand anymore. They want just normal Greek yogurt. So we want them to be able to delete stuff from their list, or maybe they make a typo and they want to be able to change it. So the list item component renders a button that allows the user to delete an item from their list when clicked. Clicking the delete button prompts the user to confirm that they really want to delete the item. So clicking delete shouldn't just make it go away. They should have to confirm. And then the delete item function in Firebase.js has been filled out and deletes the item from the Firestore database. So that's all our AC. That's how you'll know that you completed the issue. And then we have a wireframe. So activating or clicking the delete button should show a confirmation dialog. We want to give users a chance to confirm destructive actions. So things that get rid of data or get rid of like information. So it's kind of like a list. We're not worrying about the details. We are working on this delete. It kind of looks like a link here, but should be like a button. And then here it says that it should pop up a confirmation dialog, but that's kind of in the notes. That's not one of the AC. So however you want to prompt the user that they really want to delete the item is kind of a way that you'll be able to show some creativity maybe. And then it might be tempting to create your own modal dialog component for handling the confirmation, but modals are fraught with accessibility concerns, which we just learned about. So using a simple JavaScript confirm dialog will do, or I've seen like you click the button and then the button changes to be like, are you sure? Like that kind of thing. The confirm dialog is going to be the easiest thing to do though, because modals are really hard if you ever go down that rabbit hole of reading about them. And then the other issue, and this is one of the harder ones. So whoever does this one's kind of challenging. So we want users to be able to view their item list in the order of how soon they're going to need to buy the item. So if they're going to need to buy an item in the next few days, that's going to be higher up on the list than something they need to buy a few weeks from now. So sorting items by how soon the user might need to buy them will make it easier for the user to identify what they need to buy, which will help in turn, it'll help them with their shopping trips. So we need to sort items into 4 possible groups according to how urgently the user needs to buy the item. So need to buy soon is 7 days or fewer. Kind of soon is between 7 and 30 days. Not soon is more than 30 days. And then if they haven't bought an item in more than 60 days, they should be inactive. And so to implement this feature, your team will need to create some new UI elements so the user knows how their items are sorted and write some logic behind the scenes to perform the sorting itself. Read the AC and our notes carefully to be sure you understand the tasks at hand, and don't be afraid to reach out to the rest of your team and your mentors if you need help. Yeah, you've got this. So Lyle talked about swarming, I think last week. So that's when you get the other team to help you with your issue if there's anything that they can help with. And we might need to do that for this one, or you might need to do that for this one. So the AC is that items in the list are shown with an indicator that tells the user that they need to buy or that they should buy the item soon, kind of soon, or not soon, or that the item is inactive. And then the urgency indicator does not rely on only color. So that's what Grace was saying with accessibility. If you only have color, then it might be hard for colorblind users. And then export, Firestore.js exports a new compare purchase urgency function with the following behaviors. So it sorts inactive items last, then it sorts items in descending order of the days until purchase, and it sorts items with the same days until purchase alphabetically. And then as a stretch goal, if you complete all of the other AC, you can think about what happens when an item's date next purchase has passed, but it isn't inactive. So if they were supposed to buy the item like 2 days ago and they didn't, then that could be an overdue category. So you would add that to compare purchase urgency, and then that would be indicated in your UI somewhere. So there's a lot to do for this issue. Read this section for some ideas on how to approach the tasks ahead, and the get days between dates in dates.js will be useful. So remember the dates in Firestore are not dates they're not JavaScript dates, they're a timestamp object. So you'll have to call the toDate method to get the JavaScript date. And then yeah, it can be tempting to use colors or icons to indicate how soon you need an item, but if you use only color, a colorblind user won't be able to tell the difference. And if you use icons, then you have to teach users what those icons mean. So it's probably best to use just regular text, and then you can add like an emoji or something if you want, but the text is really helpful. And then you can use color too alongside the text. And the design of that and where it goes is up to you. And then we're sorting by multiple criteria. So it's whether the item is active or inactive, number of days until its date next purchased, and then alphabetically if they're the same for date next purchased or days until you have to purchase. And the JavaScript sort function can be really tricky because it's not by like, true or false. It is a little bit more complicated than that. So you might want to read through the documentation on how to write compare functions in there. So with all of that, is there a group that wants to claim one of the issues?
Arthur and I were thinking about number 12.
Number 12?
What about Hans and Danny? Yes.
I was also drawn to number 12. However, I'm not picky. Unless there is any what's it called, like disagreement from my pair this week, then I'm perfectly fine with number 11.
Yeah, same. Yeah, well, 11's fine. And then if you'll Magda and Arta, if you'll need, some swarming assistance, just let us know for sure. It's a meaty one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is. I have a question though relating to number 12. As far as like the possibility of icons was listed. I know that there's like a pretty widely used icons library for React. How do the mentors feel about us importing new libraries into and packages into the code base?
Uh, that's a good question. Do you want to go, Grace, or?
I think it's a great idea. Just consider your time constraints. You don't want to spend too much time on like importing a library. If it gets complicated, because we just don't want you guys to go over your 5 hours, unless that's something that you're really committed to. So that's the only thing I would just consider is like how long is it going to take you to learn in
Mhm.
the library.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I would point out is that issue number 13, which is it's a great transition point to think about that, is all about styling, and icons and that kind of thing kind of fit into the styling category. I know in our TCL group, we did add an icon library and use it in addition to the like library that we used for actually styling the app. So if you have an icon library that you want to use, maybe don't import it with your issue, but present like a pitch for it for when we start doing styling and you know, like where you would want to use it in our app. But yeah, they can be really helpful. Okay. Any other issues or anything else to close this out?
So just some action item reminders. Let's just make sure that we're communicating. If you guys need anything from the mentors, we're always available. Definitely office hours. I think Jeremiah, you're gonna be running that this week.
Yep, that's me.
So definitely I'll try to pop in and be there for extra support. So you guys are more than welcome to ask any questions that you want. It doesn't have to be TCL related. It can be career questions. I know Jenny asked a lot of really good questions of like my background and Lyle's background during last office hours. So I would highly encourage you guys, please take advantage of that whenever you'd like. And definitely just communicating with each other as frequently as possible and just checking in, especially with the swarming idea. So we can try to make sure that we're not having to merge our pull requests after Sunday. So yeah, those are the only two things that I would want you guys to consider.
Yeah, I would. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead and say what you're gonna say. I just have a quick question that's unrelated to the office hours.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, yeah, going off of that, it's probably best to try to get last week's issues done as quickly as you can, so that way you can get going on your next ones. Because you do have 2 weeks for the styling, and it might seem like you have a little bit of extra time, but a lot of the styling is going to be, you know, coming up with the issues for that yourselves and deciding what you want it to look like, and that takes a lot of time. So.
Actually, so
I
my
had a,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. So
All
I
right,
was
we'll
just gonna, you go first.
my question though was just gonna be tied into the upcoming styling task, which is that just you know a lot of the like kind of the weeklies that we're working on have more to do with like the functionality of things and less to do with the actual like appearance of stuff. Given that we have styling coming up, do you want us like using kind of any sort of like placeholder code or leaving comments on things that are all like you know like you know this is how it presently is, will address you know accessibility etc during styling like you know when that comes up, or should we start making styling decisions now versus just like planning on addressing those as they you know are more relevant to the tasks at hand?
Right, I had a similar, well, my question is more just what is it gonna look like when where there's just one ticket left and it's, you know, is it gonna be a lot more whole group stuff that's coming up? How is that? How do the next 2 weeks look?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would try to tackle accessibility things like right now as you're going. And then if you have anything that you want to address with styling that you think like a certain type of component or something would work really well there, then I would leave that as a comment. Something that I was thinking was like those messages that you had pop up temporarily when the user entered something that was either or the same as or empty, like that could be like a toast, or some component libraries have like warning labels and things like that. So thinking about those ahead of time is great. Leaving comments to remind yourself is also great because you might not remember 2 weeks from now. And then uh sorry, what was Arch's question?
Oh, I was just wondering what the
Oh, what it looks like, right?
like I mean, I know you're going to tell us in more detail, but just kind of like the last 2 weeks, I'm curious if it doesn't seem like it'll be the same pair programming format since there's not, like you said, we're making the issues and stuff.
Right. So it's really up to you all the way that it's going to look like. You have a lot of freedom over like there's nothing specific about what it needs to look like or use at the end. Part of it that I know Andrew really likes is how different everyone's apps end up at the end, because like you can look through previous groups apps and like spin them up and see what they look like. Some of them
Sorry,
from the
I
previous.
meant, sorry, just to clarify, I meant not what is the app going to look like? What's our
Mhm.
workflow going to look like?
Yeah, sorry, I'm
Yeah.
trying to get there.
Okay,
But
sorry.
I was taking a long time. So the way that it works is they are still set up with like partners where it's like 2 and 2. So uh if you want to write up issues for like different pages and tackle them that way, or different components that you want and tackle them as your groups that way, if you all have the ability to meet as like a 4-person team and do it that way, that's great too. It's really up to you all on how you want to tackle it. If you have time to do it synchronously, uh, that can be a good experience. If not, that works too. You'll have the ability to like use Figma if you've ever used that before, and then you could deal out like different Figma components to different people. Like there's just like a ton of freedom around it. I don't know if that answers your question. Grace can add on if she wants.
I just want to say, like, this is what I consider the most fun part, because like I love design, I love styling, and having the conversations with your teammates is always a fun experience. Because I think this is the first time, aside from swarming beforehand, this is the first time that you'll really be able to just kind of collaborate as a 4-person group. And that's always a good experience to have. It gives you a little bit more real world experience in terms of pre-planning and planning your issues and breaking down the steps, because we really want to make sure it's as bite-sized to each person as possible, and like not go over, we don't want to ask you guys to dedicate 20 hours individually to this just because it's a big task. So we want to make sure that we're respecting your times and your availability.
Yeah, agreed. I know that for my group, that's definitely where we all went the most over the 5 hours, just because it can be really tempting to like go all out on the styling. But um, the more you plan ahead, the less time you have to like spend in the moment. But yeah, so we are slightly over on time. I'm gonna stop the recording in a second and we'll get that uploaded. I think Lyle will have to do it, so whenever he is feeling up to it. And then yeah, if you have any questions, then definitely reach out in Slack. And we will do our best to get everyone the info that they need. Um, and yeah, that's all I have to say. You have any final words, Grace?
No, I think I covered it.
Okay, great. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.